Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I should start by saying a little bit more about myself and my role. I'm an English professor, as you heard, and I also serve as Dean of Undergraduate Education at Harvard. That means that I'm responsible for the education of all undergraduates at Harvard, so students in the humanities, but also in the social sciences, the natural sciences, and in engineering. So that's the kind of perspective that I take on this question. And I'm responsible in my role for dealing with, everyday things that happen in education, but also with emerging opportunities and challenges. And for the past 2 years, the number one opportunity or challenge, or both, has been generative AI. So I'm really grateful to be here to talk with you about AI and to learn from everyone else who's here. My perspective on this issue is a little different, I think, than that of the other speakers. I'm not a practitioner of AI, nor am I a theorist, whereas like the other people you'll be hearing from. I'm an administrator, and that means that I think about how an institution should respond to generative AI. Or in the context of this conference, I'm going to be raising questions about I'm going to be suggesting that the relationship between humans and AI is always going to be mediated by institutions, and that we need to pay attention to that institutional mediation when we think about this topic. So my approach is, as the title suggests, to use Harvard as a case study. I'll be talking to you about the approach we've taken at Harvard, the things we've learned over the past 2 years, and the many, many questions that remain. And my hope is that our case study will be of use to you in thinking about these issues as well. So let me start. So the first observation I want to make is that the way an institution responds to a new technology will be fundamentally shaped by the institution's pre-existing values. That the things that an institution holds dear, believes in very deeply, will shape their response to a new phenomenon. And so in this case, our response to generative AI was shaped by our pre-existing commitment to two things. And the first is what we call academic freedom. So by academic freedom, we mean the independence of faculty to pursue their research, to pursue their inquiry wherever it takes them, insulated, protected from any concerns about politics or profit or the popularity of certain ideas. We believe that faculty must be shielded from those things so that they can think freely. Academic freedom was codified in the United States more than a century ago as a value, and we believe that it is the foundation on which the American university system depends. We take this value very seriously. So, just as faculty expect to be free in their research, we allow them a great deal of freedom in their teaching. We are very deferential to our faculty. We allow them to determine what they're going to teach and how they're going to teach it. We invite them to define the objectives for their course and to determine how best to pursue them. So, of course, we do mentor our faculty. We are young instructors. We help them learn how to teach. We share pedagogical research with them, but we allow them to do what they think best with that in research. We give them, with that instruction and research and teaching, we give them great freedom in the classroom. And this sometimes has negative consequences. Faculty don't always make the decisions that I personally think are ideal in their teaching, but it also enables great creativity and variety. every classroom becomes its own laboratory, with faculty trying out new things and learning from one another what works. And we trust that in this way, by freeing our faculty to pursue their own ideas and creativity, the overall quality of our teaching will be better. So this shaped the way we responded to generative AI. We told faculty in the summer of 2023 that they were free to use or not use generative AI in their teaching as they liked. More specifically, we left to them the choice of telling their students, you may all use generative AI, none of you may use generative AI, or you may use it in some cases and not in others. We asked only that they tell students what their policy is, and then I told students they have to follow whatever their professor says for that class. What followed, I think, was revealed a great deal about the human response to new technologies. I had expected that humanities faculty would be much slower to adopt the new technology than engineers and scientists, and I see from your nods that you expect this as well. I also had expected that students would be much more interested in new technologies than faculty. But the reality turns out to be much more complex. What we see is that in every discipline, there was a small set of people who were very eager to adopt the new technology. There was another set of people who were willing to give it a try. And then there were people who adamantly refused, who said no. And those numbers were the same, roughly, across all disciplines. Humanists were slightly more likely to prohibit, but not significantly so. The largest group of faculty, though, were the faculty who tried to ignore the whole situation. And so after 4 semesters of me telling faculty they must have a policy, 60% of them still do not. No matter how persuasive and stern my emails are, they do not listen. They refuse to have a policy. And I take this to be a hope that if they ignore generative AI, it will go away. And so there we see a kind of resistance, which is across disciplines. We saw something similar with our students. In fall of 2023, we asked students, do you want to use generative AI? Are you interested in learning about it? And more than half of them said no, that they worried that generative AI would lead them to cheat, and they worried more profoundly that it would interrupt their learning, that it would keep them from learning the skills they needed to learn. Related to the principle of academic freedom is the principle of faculty governance. Academic freedom defends the rights of individual faculty to act as they see fit, and faculty governance names our commitment to the idea that decisions about the institution as a whole, about our research and teaching mission, have to be made by the faculty themselves, not by administrators. This is very important to the governance of an American university. And so in keeping with that commitment, we convened a committee of faculty to determine what Harvard's overall response to generative AI should be. We recruited an eminent physicist to lead a committee of faculty from across the disciplines, and they thought hard about what responsible use of AI should be. And they arrived at 2 principles. They say that we are obligated as teachers to teach our students how to use these new technologies, and we are obliged to learn how to use them ourselves in order to teach. So these are the 2 principles: teaching our students and using them ourselves as we teach. And in order to facilitate this, we created ChatGPT accounts for each of our students and all of our faculty. And we made them free to all of our students and faculty because it's very important to us that cost never be a barrier to a student's education. And we also kept them firewalled because we were very worried about the privacy of our students' data, both because of federal law protecting student privacy, but also because we didn't want our students' work to feed the LLMs of a corporation. What we learned is that our students have privacy concerns that are quite different. They do not use the expensive accounts that we bought for them. Instead, they get their own accounts because they're afraid that we will monitor as a university their use of AI. I'm seeing nods on that too, so this is making sense to the students in the audience. We call these accounts the sandbox, using that metaphor of a playground where children play with sand. And it was meant to suggest that we hope that this first phase of generative AI would be a time of exploration and play. And indeed, our faculty have done a number of interesting things with their accounts, which I'll tell you about now. So the first set of, no. I'm so sorry. Great. Okay. So you'll remember that when ChatGPT first arrived, all of the headlines in the newspaper, at least in the United States, were about the dangers of cheating, right? Worries that students were going to use ChatGPT to plagiarize their papers or in some way have the AI do their work for them. This was at least the concern in the United States. The first response on faculty's part was, I would characterize it as resistance. They worked very hard to figure out how to circumvent the technology, how to disable it, so that students could continue to learn in the old ways. So the first response to something new is to push it away and keep on with the old. And so this took several forms. Our faculty are going back. We had moved in a direction of having our students do their work outside of the classroom, doing take-home examinations, long papers rather than in-person tests. We are moving now back into examinations in a room where students are handwriting their answers. Some of our faculty are moving in a direction of returning to oral exams, where they directly examine the students. This is fine as a response, but I'm more interested in the second round of response, which is a more creative collaboration with the new technology. So more recently, faculty have been experimenting with ways to use generative AI to improve evaluation. So for instance, they are creating exams that are interactive and iterative. So a student gives an answer, and then based on whether the answer is correct or incorrect, the next question gets harder or easier so that the examiner can hone in on exactly the level of the student's mastery. And one of my colleagues is creating an app that will enable anyone to upload all of their course materials, and it will produce that kind of exam for that course. So we're going to have much more fine-tuned assessments coming out of generative AI. There are other ethical questions beyond academic integrity that are raised by generative AI, and our faculty are designing courses around this. So we have intro writing courses now that teach students to think hard about the ethics of intellectual property and creativity, right, and what generative AI means for that. We have classes that are open to all students that help students think about the energy and environmental implications of generative AI, as well as the implications for labor. The other aspect of what we want to teach students to do with generative AI, we want them to use it ethically, and we want them to use it effectively. And here too, the first response by faculty was often resistance. So 2 years ago, faculty often said, don't use generative AI because the papers it comes up with aren't great, or they're cliched, or they're full of hallucinations, or the code it produces has problems in it. That worked okay as a strategy 2 years ago, but as the generative AIs get better and better, it's less and less persuasive as a response. And so increasingly, our students know that they will be using these tools out in the workforce, and they know too that they're using them over the summer in their internships. And so we have to teach them how to use these tools effectively. What we're seeing now is divisions among our students. There are some who, the strong students, are using these tools well on their own and getting even stronger. The weak students are using them in less effective ways and getting even weaker. And so we are obligated, we think, to teach them to learn ourselves how to use these tools effectively in our work, and then teach that to our students. The other aspect, or the other goal we have, is using generative AI to teach our students. And there are 3 use cases here that I think are particularly interesting. The first is in lecture courses. As you know, lecture courses have pros and they have cons, right? There is the problem of the kind of opaque audience. I don't know right now what you're thinking. I don't know what you are understanding about what I'm saying and what you're not. And so instructors have developed different techniques for responding to that. Often students fill out little note cards at the end and hand them in, and then professors review them after the fact. But that is not real-time feedback. We can now use the generative AI to gather feedback in the middle of class and present it to the instructor. So halfway through, the instructor can put up a QR code, and the generative AI will say to him, your students understand this concept really well, they're confused about that one, and they want you to talk more about this other one. And then he can adjust in the middle of lecture. So that's a really effective way of surfacing questions and confusions in a class in real time. The second thing that we can do in a lecture class, or the second challenge that we face in a lecture class, is when we want students to learn how to take theory and apply it, right? How to not only learn things, but then learn how to do them. And so in a humanities or social science class, that often means we want the students to argue. We want them to bring up counterpoints of view. We want them to raise questions and find issues. But what we find is that students are sometimes reluctant to do that. They may be reluctant temperamentally because they're shy, they don't want to put their hand up, or only a few people are willing to raise their hand in the middle of the lecture class. Or they may be ideologically hesitant. They don't want to say something that disagrees with the predominant point of view. They don't want to stand out. And that means that the discussion in class can get kind of not very rich or rewarding as everyone sort of agrees with one another in the discussion. So our faculty, we have a political theory professor who would put up a problem, like the famous lifeboat problem. There's 10 people in a lifeboat and only 8 of them can stay. Who do you push over the side? And then he'll have the students put down their answers. He uploads them, and then the algorithm tells him, you know, there's 2 predominant answers. Some students are saying this and some are saying that, but he programs the algorithm to then say, and here are some outlier points of view. Here are some points of view that only one student had. And then he calls on those students to get their voice into the conversation. So he uses the generative AI to bring forward voices that would otherwise not be heard. The other, in science classes, the problem of the passivity of the lecture course we have a different response to it, what we call active learning, right? So increasingly, as you may know, in science classes, students learn the material at home on their own, and they come to class where they work together in groups. Some of our physics faculty were interested to see whether generative AI would improve active learning, and so they did a controlled test where some students did the traditional active learning. They learned the material at home, and then they worked in groups in class, while others learned the material at home and then interacted with a generative AI, with an agent. And what we found was that the second group of students, the ones where the generative AI replaced the group work, they reported being more engaged, more interested in the class, and their quiz scores were higher. So it was a more effective way of teaching. The second use of generative AI for teaching that seems very promising to me is replacing or augmenting office hours, right? So office hours, as you know, are the time where students can come and meet one-on-one with an instructor. Increasingly, our faculty are creating agents that are specific to their courses, that are designed to answer students' questions as an instructor would, not by giving you the answer, but by asking that next question that will help you think for yourself. And so more and more of our courses have these kind of agents attached to them. And students love it. They find it more convenient. They can talk to an AI agent at 2 in the morning when they can't talk to their professor. But they also find it less intimidating. We found out that our students were afraid to come to professors and ask them questions, or ask them as many questions as they have. Now they can ask the AI agent over and over again until they truly master. So we're giving much better feedback to students, more frequent and better using AI. And finally, a more surprising use to me is the way that AI is helping everyone prepare for class. One thing that we tell students to do now is, for instance, in a class I might teach in American literature, my students the night before class, they can ask the AI, they can say, my professor, I'm a student at Harvard, my professor, I'm reading Moby Dick. My professor will ask me, tends to be interested in social issues. What are 3 questions she might ask me tomorrow? And then the AI will give the questions, and then the student can come up with the answers themselves, right? And so it's a really good way, not of using the AI to get the answer, but to use it to get the question, to get you thinking. Faculty also are using generative AI to prepare for their courses. They're using it for course design. One thing we encourage faculty to do is to upload their syllabus and all of their readings, and then ask the generative AI, what kind of final exam should I be giving? Like, what have I actually taught my students? And what do you think the learning objectives for this course were? And so the AI can show if there's a mismatch, if the learning objectives don't match up well to the actual work being assigned, the AI can point that out and the faculty member can adjust. A final use that our faculty are doing with AI agents is to ask them, the AI monitors student performance on quizzes, identifies the students who are starting to fall behind, and then writes them a customized personal email inviting them to come to the faculty office hours for some additional help. And so it's enabling us to be much more engaged with our students. So what unites all of these efforts, I'd say, is that they augment the kind of instruction we already knew we wanted to do. They help us make our lectures more interactive, which we already wanted to do. They help us provide more feedback, which we were already committed to doing. And they help us with course design and our students with preparation for class. So I think AI is very effective at augmentation. We have not yet thought about transformation. How might education be entirely reimagined around generative AI? And specifically, I think about the question of the individual, right? Our model of education is fundamentally individualistic. We think of individual students mastering certain skills and bodies of knowledge, and then we think about assessing them individually. What if we were to de-individualize that model and acknowledge that our students can now work with tools collaboratively, and that the assessment will have to be more collaborative as well? So that's one big question I think we still need to grapple with, and here are 3 final ones to leave us with. One is the question of automation, right? When we first grappled with the problem of cheating, we used athletic training as a metaphor. We would say, how can our students learn how to do something if they're not putting in the reps, right? If they're not doing enough repetitions of the exercise to build their muscle. But I think a bigger question is, which muscles do they need to build, right? What are the things they must learn how to do for themselves before they rely on the AI? Things like how we teach children to add and subtract before we let them use a calculator. And what are the things that we can stop teaching students how to do? The way that we don't in America really teach handwriting anymore because we know that students are going to use keyboards. So which are the things that we can stop teaching and which are the things we still have to teach? I think that's something for each discipline to reflect on for itself. The second question has to do with interdisciplinarity. One thing that generative AI enables us to do is to use it kind of prosthetically for skills that we are not being taught in a particular class. So I, as an English professor, can ask my students to code some stuff, to analyze a corpus of texts. So at what point do we expect all of our students to do that, right? Or to put another way, I trained as a literature professor at a time when the way to analyze literature was to read one book at a time. But now we have tools that enable us to analyze vast corpuses. And so at what point does that become mandatory for our scholarship? I think, again, each discipline is going to have to decide for themselves. And then finally, the changing world of work. I mean, one of the things we do in a university is teach our students, we prepare them for the world, for the jobs that are ahead of them, right? But the world of work is changing dramatically because of generative AI, and we will have to figure that out and figure out what skills they need. So to sum up, here are some QR codes, and you can see examples of all the things we're doing at Harvard with generative AI in case you find that inspirational. And I'll just quickly summarize the points I'm trying to make here. One, that the human response to technology is variable, and that it has as much to do with individual personality and temperament as it does with age or with discipline. Two, that the human response to technology and to AI is mediated by institutions. We don't just have a person here and an AI here and they interact in a vacuum. They're embedded in institutions that will shape their response. That generative AI is very effective at augmenting our current ways of teaching, but there's still work to do in reimagining what education might be. And finally, that we have to really reflect as faculty together on what generative AI means for the way we teach our disciplines, the way we draw our disciplinary boundaries, and the way we prepare our students for their careers. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Claybaugh. Now, Professor Won from the Department of Sociology at KNU will respond to the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Won from Sociology Department here at Kyungpook National University. Nice to meet you all. Actually, I didn't expect this big audience, considering that this is vacation time. And thank you, Dean Claybaugh, for that insightful and refreshingly pragmatic presentation for me, actually. And before we begin the discussion, I want to make one thing clear. I'm by no means an expert on AI. Like many of you here, actually, I'm simply an educator whose concerns have deepened with the rise of AI. So I assume the reason I was asked to lead the discussion today is because I'm going to Harvard Yanshin this year. So probably it might be helpful for me to gain some understanding of the kinds of educational experiment Harvard is now undertaking. So listening to you, I couldn't help but reflect on my own teaching. I'll be honest, my first reaction to AI was very defensive. I found myself going back to old school master dimension, like in-class handwritten exams, just to sidestep the ethical issues. So your talk really changed my mindset on this issue. It's pushed me to stop seeing AI as just a problem to be managed and start thinking about it as a pedagogical opportunity. So I'd like to structure my commentary around 3 themes prompted by your talk. So first, the necessary redesign of the ways in which we evaluate students. And second, the urgent need to redefine core competencies within each academic discipline. And finally, the institutional frameworks required to support this transition. And first, on the matter of pedagogical assessment evaluation. And I strongly agree that the old argument like AI makes mistakes and therefore humans will always be the final check. Yeah. This kind of idea is quickly becoming obsolete. So the technology is just getting too good, too fast. So relying on that idea feels like a losing battle for me. So that raises a really fundamental question for all of us. If a student can use an AI to generate a perfectly good essay, what exactly are we supposed to be grading? So what actually interested me is that when you said about the bifurcation that you mentioned, where strong students use AI to become stronger, and while weaker students are further behind, that actually shows how urgent this problem is. And as a sociologist, this phenomenon can be seen as a new form of cultural capital. Yeah. So AI fluency is itself becoming a form of capital that creates new social hierarchies. So it seems clear that we have to shift our focus away from the final product. Instead, we need to grade the process. So we should be looking at how a student engages with AI, the kinds of questions they ask it, and how well they can spot its biases and blind points. And that gets to the core of the curriculum, the question of what actually we teach. And for me, the most crucial question you raised was, what skills should we automate? And what skills must humans still learn for themselves? And I think every single department has to figure out what is fundamental, non-negotiable skills, such as what she said, addition and subtraction, and what skills we might be able to let go of. So I was thinking about this in the context of, say, film studies program. And to create the next great filmmaker, do we keep teaching the solitary craft of writing a screenplay from scratch? Or is it now more important to teach a student how to direct an AI to generate, refine, and elevate a script? Is the key skill drawing a storyboard by hand? Or is it knowing how to prompt an AI to produce something even more innovative? So we have to figure out how to best empower our students. But as you said, the risk of trying these things out on our own is kind of huge. So this brings me to my actually final point, the need for an institutional framework. And your presentation on the many experiments at Harvard is very inspiring. And but for an individual faculty member, the stakes of such experiments are incredibly high. So a success can be an innovation, but a failure can derail an entire semester's course. So I think individual professors cannot be expected to figure all this out on their own. So that's why I think institutions like my own Kyungpook National University have so much to learn from what you're doing at Harvard. So we need to move beyond just relying on ambitious individuals, and I think we start building systematic, university-wide initiatives to explore these questions. And this might take the form of a dedicated research committee or a task force. So I was really interested in the structures you mentioned at Harvard, and I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. First, about the STUPS committee you mentioned, and I'm curious, what were some of the biggest challenges in getting that committee up and running? And given how different the cultures are across disciplines, and how do you get people to even speak the same language, and let alone agree on path forward? And once the committee develops these great ideas, is there a formal way to make sure they actually spread across the university? And my other question is about that fascinating example of the course-specific AI tutors you mentioned. It's amazing, but also a bit predictable that students actually found them less intimidating, right? And use them more. And so I'd like to hear a bit more about that. In what kinds of courses did you find this work best? Can you tell us a little bit about the design process? How did you train them? And more importantly, how did you make them pedagogical? So they would guide a student thinking instead of simply providing answers, right? So to wrap up, Dean Claybaugh, your presentation has given us a vital framework to work with. I hope that as we all face these challenges these days, we also see the opportunity here. So a chance to sharpen our teaching, to deepen our curricular, and to reaffirm our commitment to fostering the kind of critical, creative, and ethical human beings the contemporary world so desperately needs. Thank you.
So you asked a number of really important questions, and I am feeling very grateful to be. I feel that a sociologist understands an administrator, so I think we were perfectly matched. So I appreciate that. I have many things to say in response, but I want to also make sure we have time for other questions. So I'll just say two things. One is about, oh my goodness, I'm blanking. You asked so many questions. Oh, yes. The faculty committee had limitations. So the way faculty committees work, in my experience, I hope it's different in yours, is that a group of people get together and they argue with each other from their disciplinary perspectives. Maybe they come to some shared ideas, but then no one else listens to them, right? So the part where, if faculty aren't answering my emails, they're definitely not doing what the Stubbs committee is telling them to do. So we had to find another mode of intervention. And so what we are doing is, I think, as I said, it has to be, we are finding ways of using generative AI that are discipline specific, and then we are inviting ourselves to a faculty meeting of that department, and we are making all of the faculty bring their laptop, and we are making them open their laptop and look at ChatGPT if they've never done it before. And then we are saying, please take one of your exam questions and run it through ChatGPT. And then they say, and then they realize that the world is changing around them. And then they are motivated. So you have to help the faculty see that they have a problem that you can help them solve. And then we rely on trusted colleagues. Faculty don't like to listen. They like to listen to other faculty whom they respect more than an administrator or some kind of teaching expert. So we get a very respected person in that department who is using generative AI to then show everyone else. And so it's that kind of culture change. That's the sort of institutional structure. The other thing you were asking about automation, I remember. A colleague of mine said something very interesting. She's maybe 60. And she said, people who are our age are the perfect generation for using generative AI because we know how to do the things ourselves. And so we have an intuitive sense of what the tools are good at, what they're not good at, and when to deploy them. And we are falling down on the job of helping the young students get that same knowledge. So I feel a lot of urgency about this because I have something that I need to pass on to my students to make sure that they will be okay. So you pointed to changing the way we assess work by grading process rather than product, and I think that's a really good response. Our colleague Dennis Tennant, who you will be hearing from later today, just had an interesting, or told me something interesting on the bus today. He said another thing we could do is we could raise the standards way higher, right? Like if we take as baseline for a student what it can do with, in 5 seconds with ChatGPT, then let's try and imagine something much more ambitious. And I think that's what I mean when I say, let's figure out what we can do with these tools that we haven't tried yet, and then teach that to our students and require them to perform at that level. Other questions, or are we?
Yeah, we're a little bit behind the schedule. So yeah, it's fine. Yeah. So if you have any question, you can just use the coffee break time. Okay. So thank you very much, Professor Claybaugh. Thank you. So, our next